everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on ChatGPT as a virtual assistant. We have our AI expert and Trans-Humanist Party presidential candidate for 2024, Mr. Tom Rose. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Uh, then we have Mr. Rob, we have Brent Tillman, and we have Mr. Dan. First, I would like to give chance Mr. Tom Rose.
Well, also, yeah, Dan here is my vice presidential running mate for the Transhumanist Party. And
Hello, thank you, Tom.
sure. Let's see, the subject today is ChatGTP as a personal assistant, I think specifically.
Yes.
And I have been using it as such. There's a lot of work to do in the campaign for writing proposals and initiatives. And so I'll prompt it with certain ideas, and it'll spit out a very good that I need to massage later a little bit to put some human into it. But it's really taken away a lot of the heavy lifting of doing some of these proposals, and even letter writing and speech writing and things like that. I haven't used it for a speech yet, but even just correcting grammar, it's just a great system to use. And I think it's really going to make us human beings hone in on certain skill sets that we have. We don't have to spend so much time, formatting or writing, checking our grammar or our spelling and this type of thing. So it's really going to take over a lot of that heavy lifting. And so that's how I've been using it so far with this campaign. And so I think there's a lot to be said about how it's going to change everything. Just like Google changed it, where we don't have to go to the library to look up any facts anymore. It's all at our fingertips. And so now with ChatGPT taking over some of the heavy lifting of formatting and research, it's going to be really changing a lot of things very quickly.
Excellent. Mr. Tom Rose, as you are running for US presidential candidate for 2024, so how you move with your different campaign, what type of initiative you are taking, and how, yes.
Yeah, well, we've got quite a few proposals out there. We're just throwing a bunch at the wall and seeing what sticks. But mostly, this campaign we have no expectation that Dan and I will be walking into the White House in January 2025. That's not what this is about. This is about clearing the path for younger, smarter, digital native candidates and hopefully transhumanist candidates in the future. We have so many existential threats to our country and to our species and planet that we don't have time to waste on toddler politicians or attention-seeking people that are just in it to be in it. So we need to break a lot of political paradigms right now. And that's what we're doing. We're kind of a wrecking crew to make way, to clear a path for younger, smarter digital natives. And so one of the ways we're doing that is, to break the divide and conquer or divide and rule paradigm is instead of debates, we had roundtables, or more like problem-solving sessions. And we are bringing a lot of young people into it. I'm seeing them as digital dignitaries because we, as a Generation X, my childhood was analog, my adulthood is digital. And so a lot of the solutions that I have no longer really apply because I'm still seated in that embedded reality of my childhood. And so we need to bring young people into this more and more and find out what they're doing on their phones, to solve a lot of these problems. And so that's part of it. So a big part of it is bringing young people into it. I'm talking about proposing a singularity secretary, a whole new cabinet seat to deal with the technological and economic singularities that are heading our way and that are already here, really. So there's a lot of ideas we have. Also an initiative to hand public school students from first grade through 12th their own AI tutor, their own AI companion, something that will learn them and hone in on their core capacities and give them extra help in subjects where they need it. And I think that's going to be very important because we're still in this lag time from the industrial age where we are still training people to be working in factories. We all sit in rows and we have one manager/teacher at the front. And this whole industrial age educational system was preparing us to work on assembly lines. And that's got to change. It's got to change quickly. And so one way to do that is to have an AI tutor that can customize a curriculum to each student's core capacity. So there's a bunch of ideas that we've got, and but mostly it's about listening hard.
Thank you, Mr. Rob Enderly. What you want to discuss about ChatGPT?
Well, generative AI is certainly a game changer. We weren't talking about this at all last year, and suddenly in 6 months, this thing has become the hottest thing in Silicon Valley. Pretty much everybody and their brothers running at it. Of course, yesterday, Apple, to be fundamentally different, decided to launch a head-mounted computer instead of generative AI. And the ironic thing, of course, is the head-mounted computer is going to need generative AI as part of the interface, because there's no way in hell you're going to use a keyboard with that thing. But the promise and the problem with generative AI are intermingled. The promise is this is a tool that can enhance people, make them more productive, allow their imaginations to run free, and allow you to see and with 3D printing even touch things that otherwise would have been imaginary, that you would have never been able to produce otherwise, just too costly. So this reduces the overall cost of a lot of things, but it's also incredibly disruptive. We already have ads that have been written by generative AI, top to bottom. One of the science fiction publishing sites had to shut down submissions because some of the authors were turning in upwards of 200 manuscripts at a time, largely done and created by generative AI, and so this became overwhelmed with content. And there are certainly some issues with generative AI at the moment. One is the AI can't, any more than we often can, tell the difference between what is true and what is not. They can become corrupted. They've begun to hallucinate. Basically create facts out of ether that aren't facts, which is problematic, because if you were to rely on those facts, much like if you were to rely on the facts from a politician that's lying, you're going to make a bad decision. So the ability to curate the results of the AI now become kind of important, and generative AI can be used to cheat. And that's got education pretty much upset at the moment. The idea that a student could, rather than reading a book and doing a book report, could just tell the generative AI to do that for them, and thus not gain any of the knowledge connected to the act, is problematic. Getting kids to use the tool to enhance what they're doing, but not to replace what they're doing, is going to be problematic, because everybody wants to do stuff easier, and generative AI does provide a path to accomplish that. So we've got ethics issues. We've got technology still brand new and in its infancy, and clearly we've got quality issues with regard to the technology, and then the end. We've got a bunch of people asking government to step in and regulate it, when government really hasn't wrapped its head around the internet, let alone generative AI at this point. So the government's likely to do ugly things in this space, because they simply just don't know really what the technology is, what it's capable of, and how to put in guardrails. So at least Microsoft, of one of the companies that I work with, they popped up with not only asking for help, but detailing how that help should be provided, and dictating what those guardrails should look like. That's really how these requests should be coming through, is the experienced people that are asking for regulation shouldn't be just screaming bloody murder about the exposures. They need to articulate what you do to mitigate it, because they're the ones that are experienced with the technology and are most capable of providing a guidance as to what kinds of guardrails would work and which kinds would not. Asking politicians to do that at this point is asking for a catastrophe. And then we've got the efforts to ask people to pause generative AI or AI in general. That's silliness. The people that are behind are certainly not going to pause their efforts, and the people that are ahead aren't going to want people behind to catch up. And that's on a company and a country basis, because this is flowing through pretty much all aspects of technology, including defense, at the moment. And it's going to have some really interesting impacts on folks that write for a living. Currently in the United States, we've got a big writer's strike going on in the movie and television industry, and clearly that industry is looking at using generative AI to at least initially supplement, if not replace, writers. And so having a strike At the same time, a competing technology shows up, may turn out to be extremely ill-advised, but waiting longer might have been even more ill-advised. So dealing with this disruption that this technology is going to provide is going to be probably something that's going to engage us for the next decade, because it's going to be highly disruptive. It's going to change very much how we do things. And using the new head-mounted computer from Apple as an example, you combine that with generative AI, and that might be the only computer that you need. And now Apple, of course, wants it to be additive. So you'd have this thing, this $3,500 head-mounted computer on top of the iPhone, Mac, and whatever other technology you have from them, because they like you to have a lot of stuff. But a head-mounted computer could replace all of that stuff. I'm not convinced we're there yet with the phone, because I think law enforcement would have issues with you wearing that while driving. But almost any place else it would be viable. And depending on the capability of the cameras, you might be able to see better with the headset on than you'd see without it, because the cameras could augment your eyesight. And then if you can just talk to the computer as opposed to typing or using a mouse, then you can engage with that, and that could be your only computer. And it does get around one of the big limitations of our existing computing technology, which is screen real estate, by giving you what would, in theory, be the maximum amount of screen that your eyes could perceive. So the limiting factor then being your eyes, not the device itself, flipping that particular dynamic. So we've got a lot going on in this space. It's easy to get overly excited about it. The technology is very young, very immature, but it's advancing also incredibly quickly. And the capabilities we'll see in 5 years are going to eclipse everything we're seeing right now. If you get a chance and see some of the crazy stuff that's going on, and you go on YouTube, you'll see that they've already started to go in and reimagine existing movies with different actors, different directors, completely different color schemes, and that's up on YouTube. And they're using generative AI, mostly ChatGPT, generative AI through all of it. And can you imagine a time where you could, in the future, where you'd be able to look at a movie like Top Gun Maverick and maybe place your kids in instead of Tom Cruise, or you in instead of Tom Cruise as you're watching the movie, and then being able to share that particular iteration for a fee across social media? The movie company makes money because you're using the movie again. I don't know if Tom Cruise would still make, well, he would, because he funded the thing, so he'd clearly make money. But how the actors would get paid if you're replacing the actors with normal people, that's going to be kind of interesting. And maybe in the future we'll create a stub of a movie with just an avatar in for the actors, and what we'll do is we'll place ourselves, our friends, our family in the movie to better engage with it, and see how they would react and interact in a movie. It could be interesting. I think it'd be particularly useful for kids to get them really focused on the content. Why argue about the color of the skin of the Littlest Mermaid if you can put your kid in as the Littlest Mermaid, and who cares? I mean, the thing is that they'll have a ball and they'll see themselves doing all the crazy stuff the Littlest Mermaid does. So in the end, and generative AI can do that. So in the end, our capability to create content is just going to go vertical. And if we didn't already have a ton of content that involves our lives, it's going to get even more interesting going forward. So disruptive, maximum disruption as we progress, potentially much more disruptive than the internet was, since it encompasses that. And I don't think there's going to be a single aspect of content creation that is going to be impacted by this, hopefully most positively. But it will change. It will change our labor dynamics. It'll change our productivity dynamics. It'll create a level of distraction that makes probably what we're seeing right now in social media look trivial by comparison. And being able to manage all of that is going to be our challenge going forward. I'll pass that.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Dan. Mr. Dan?
He said he was just going to be listen-only mode for a period of time. I think he's doing something else.
Okay. Now I request Mr. Brentelman. I don't know.
Sure. Cheers. Yeah, some great points from both of you. I think that it's without a shadow of a doubt, ChatGPT and these other generative AI and natural language processors are absolutely going to revolutionize many things. I agree that it's going to have a large impact, of course, as we're seeing with the strike in Hollywood and such. I think that a microcosm, as you were talking, Rob, that kind of came to mind when you were discussing this impact that it's going to have on the film industry is similar to the way that the music industry has evolved over the last couple decades, with the ability for independent artists to be able to create, produce, sell, market their own work, and that it's really shifted the power structure from these major, the big five, as they say, to, these independent people. I remember, I think it was Mac Miller was the first independent artist to get like a platinum record or something like that. And, I think that there's still, Hollywood still has the ability to market and advertise and has all these networks. So I think that it's going to be difficult for individuals to just create movies and content that they can immediately compete with Hollywood. But I think that ultimately we're going to see a lot more independent filmmakers and things like that, of course. Now, I don't necessarily agree with some of the points that we've been discussing. For one, I don't think that our government is completely unaware about how to deal with this AI. Rob, you mentioned the internet. The internet was created by our government. It was originally the DARPA net. Similarly, DARPA has, they claim to be about 30 years ahead of us. And so I think that the concern that the public might sense with the, this idea that the government doesn't know how to handle it, I think that that's a little bit overblown, given I'm a little bit biased to be, as a progressive, I'm not really a big fan of Ludditism. So, and similarly with that concept of Ludditism and, and cheating in education and things like that, I'm a student right now. I'm in school at the University of Denver, and it's been really interesting to see ChatGPT kind of gain popularity in the classrooms and stuff. The beginning of this school year, most of the kids there didn't know what ChatGPT was, and now everybody knows what it is. But, like we were saying, like you both were saying, these AIs are prone to hallucination. And so for someone to use ChatGPT or one of these other natural language processors to just simply do their homework for them, for instance, as someone who's tried, it doesn't work very well. But on the other hand, in the fall and in the spring, I spent hundreds of dollars on tutoring sessions for some of my classes. Calculus, I hadn't taken a math course in over 10 years, so it was a little difficult to jump back into calc. But so now that I've got ChatGPT kind of more worked into my routine, I've figured out how to use it to help let it tutor me and asking it for the answer. A lot of times it won't even give you the answer. When you give it these long equations, analytics, finance, accounting, and you ask it to get to an answer for you, most of the time it'll give you the wrong one, first off. Second off, it's more useful to ask it how to get to the answer. And so this has saved me hundreds of dollars in tutoring, and and it's a much quicker way of learning these concepts and things like that. And when it comes to viewing it as cheating, I think that it's fair that when we were in elementary school, using a calculator while you're learning addition would be cheating. But back then we were all, at a certain point you realize, well, why am I figuring out like long division? Especially now that we've got these iPhones in our pocket, it's kind of like, the way that I look at it is right now, if you were doing mathematics with an abacus and then the calculator came onto the scene and you were refusing to use a calculator because you thought it was cheating, you're really doing yourself a disservice. And similarly in these classrooms, I find that teachers and professors that are discouraging our use of these tools are kind of doing us a disservice, because in the real world we should be using these tools. If I'm working a job and my manager asks me to do a task, and I know how to do the task by hand, or I know how to leverage these tools to make to expedite this process and to improve my end result, why would I not do the latter? It just makes more sense, and it's better for everybody. And so I think that it's, and obviously, like you said, Rob, the educational system is not really excited about ChatGPT right now. But I think that, those who understand the weight that this tool is going to carry and the value that it has, and the fact that we need to be incorporating it and integrating it and learning how to use it to improve upon whatever we're doing, I think that that's going to be leading us to the best outcome. And I think that there's just the potentials are boundless, really. Rob, you mentioned that new Apple spatial computing device. I was actually sharing yesterday, there was a GoFundMe that I saw for another device that integrated ChatGPT into a headset that you could control with your eyes and with your voice and sensitive to sounds and things like that. And so, I mean, I think that the way this is all going to develop, it's almost difficult to kind of perceive at this point. Are we going to have the option to have contact lenses that do these types of things, or I mean, to get sound and things like that? Obviously, it would need a little bit more hardware, but I think that it's absolutely revolutionizing things, and I think that considering the ethics behind all this is absolutely paramount. But I think personally, my concerns and my fears are mitigated by the fact that I personally have a belief that seems to be corroborated by evidence that our government likely has technology far more advanced than any of this stuff, and that our government is probably rolling the dice much more than we are. As similarly to the Manhattan Project, if not us, then them. And so I can only imagine how that translates into AI research for the United States government, working to stay ahead of countries like Japan or Russia or whoever else it might be. And so, my thought is that any mishap that a civilian could potentially get themselves into using something like ChatGPT or any of these other generative AIs, our government's probably done much worse, or at least potentially done much worse. And so I think that ethics, like I said, is important. Copyright and things like that, need to be considered. But even with copywriting, it's as a lot of artists, for instance, are frustrated with the fact that these generative AIs can create artwork that's similar to their own, and that it's using these other inputs to generate outputs, and that this is an infringement on copyright and what's the word I'm looking for? Intellectual property. But at the end of the day, as any other artist is influenced by other art, influenced by the world around them as well. But if you look at any style of paint, look at painting styles from the last 300 years, you're going to have 100 artists that look the same, and they say mimicry is the biggest, is a form of flattery. So I don't really think that infringing on copyright and trademark and things like that is going to be. I don't see that as very relevant personally. I think that if anything, this is forcing people to become more creative, and I think that it's fair for people to be threatened by this. But I think that it's really important to look at the parallels that are existing today that occurred in the first Industrial Revolution with the Luddite movement. And the fact of the matter is, the Luddites were not trying to help society. They were self-motivated. They wanted to continue to make textiles in their factories, and so they started raging against the machine, so to speak, creating damage in these factories, things like that. And similarly, I don't think that just look at this writer's strike in Hollywood, like you said, Rob. It's pretty poor timing on their part. I'm sure that there's a number of people that were like, well, I could do that, or I could leverage this technology and get a leg up on all these guys that are out there picketing. And so I think that it's going to be kind of interesting to see it, because I think that a lot of these people, that are like these Hollywood folks, it's selfishness, really, because it's not like they're not making good money. They just want to continue to do that. And I think that what needs to happen, one of the biggest things that needs to happen in our society today, globally, is to share in the abundance that already exists. And, I think that, I don't think that means that we all should be living at these low standards, but I think that everybody's standard, the average standard of living, should be raised for everyone. And that these technologies have very much, a massive capability, I apologize, to help do that. And so, I think that, it is valid that there are concerns to be made and arguments to be had, but I think that playing the defense right now, and we've got organizations like DARPA that have already been doing that for us before allowing this technology to reach the public, is a little bit silly. I think there's a long history of the United States government, the U.S. Patent Office, our Trademark Patent Office, withholding patents from the public because of fears of national security and things like that. And I would imagine that there's been plenty of AI-related technologies that have been siphoned off into the private governmental sectors and things like that over the years for safety concerns. And so I think that, ChatGPT, it's not like this is the first time that this type of thing has reached humanity. This is not something new for humanity. This is something new for the general population. And so I think that that's something important to keep in mind. Runaway AI and things like that. I don't believe that they would have released this to the public if those concerns were actually valid at this point. And you know what? Maybe I'm wrong, and we'll all be living in underneath the thumb of Skynet here shortly. But those are the odds I'm willing to to play against. So thank you, and on to the next, Daniel.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel.
Yeah. So thanks for being patient with me there. Hey, Tom, this is, I think, our first appearance in a dual public forum as candidates. So it's kind of significant. Glad to do it on Dr. Sharif's show. And it's a great topic because, first of all, is my audio okay? Okay, cool. The whole idea of the internet, actually, as Brent was saying, it came about as a command and control problem that the defense establishment, they asked the question, how can we have command and control when there are nuclear bombs going off everywhere and the whole communication structure is getting exploded? So what they came up with was something called a store and forward protocol. That's what we know as TCP/IP, Terminal Control Protocol, Internet Protocol. And it was basically the idea that you have nodes, and these nodes are able to take any message traffic they have and route it based on packet kinds of technology. And, it's kind of funny because in the early days of amateur radio, the founder of the American Radio Relay League back in like around 1910, he was a guy named Hiram Percy Maxim. His dad had invented the machine gun, and he was a race car driver. He made silencers for guns and mufflers for cars. But the government was actually on the verge of saying, oh, this radio technology, this is too new and too important. It's got to just be left to the government. We can't let American citizens play around with radio. This is a huge military risk. And he actually, Percy Maxim, lobbied the members of Congress because he had access to the government at that point, and he said, no, don't make this. They were going to give it to the Navy. He said, no, we have a great Yankee ingenuity base of Americans here that can experiment with this, and it's going to be a great thing. And it's kind of funny. He needed to order a vacuum tube from Connecticut, and I think he was in the California area. And so he was too cheap to send a telegram. Telegrams were expensive back then. It was like a $1 a word or something. And so he said, oh, I know all these radio experimenters. I'll just send a message to the closest one I can reach, tell him about this tube I want to order, and he can send it to the next guy. And after so many hops, my message is going to get out to Connecticut, where they have this tube I need, and they're going to put the order in and send it back to me. So it was like the first internet there. It was a store and forward kind of protocol done with and at that point they were using spark gap transmitters, which, when you make a spark, it sends out this huge static noisy signal. These things are illegal now, but those for like the first 10 years of radio, those were the first transmitters, just these massive sparks that, you'd hear a little Morse code of static going off in your ear set, and you'd write down, what the message was, and then you'd send it on to the next spark gap radio station. So we're kind of in a similar breakpoint of technology with ChatGPT and the internet. I mean, the guy from OpenAI, I forget his name, but he testified before Congress, oh yeah, we're going to keep humans in the loop. But then he also said on a podcast, we don't know what this thing is doing. It's just solving problems, and we don't understand the algorithms it's using to solve them. So, at one point we all agree, yeah, keep humans in the loop. Don't have autonomous weapons. Don't let machines go off and do things without human supervision. But we're already letting them do this without human supervision, because as soon as you get very strong machine learning or AI, and then you couple that with another AI and you say, look, you guys should like solve this problem. Just, I don't care how you do it, just solve the problem. And those two AIs are going to start solving the problem trillions of times faster than humans can solve it. And we're not going to go, how the heck they solved it. So we're going to see this, what's called AGI or super intelligence. And once this super intelligence gets loose in society, I mean, it's the equivalent of a weapon of mass destruction. I mean, it's like giving everyone their own, breeder reactor and the capability to make pandemics in their basement, which we actually already have, kind of. I mean, we actually, this was talked about when I was in the libertarian movement back in the 80s and 90s. They'd say, look, there's so many mass destruction technologies in so many hands. The government is going to have no choice but to institute a total surveillance society. And some might argue we already have ubiquitous surveillance. I mean, the default mode for your little Alexa box, is just always listen and always create training data sets based on everything you hear and see. And people don't bother to reset that default parameter on their on their little Amazon Echoes and their Alexas. So is this, the science fiction writer David Brin, whom I'm a big fan of, he wrote a book called The Transparent Society. And his solution to this pervasive surveillance is basically to make it surveillance, to make it, if you can watch the watchers just as much as they're watching you, that's kind of about the best compromise you can hope for. So we need to see if that works, because once you have unequal surveillance, that's what's called asymmetrical warfare. It's like you've changed the. That's why guerrilla wars have been so successful against big centralized powers, because you've got these little guerrillas popping up and disappearing, and they know what the enemy's doing, but the enemy doesn't know what they're doing. Well, that's the situation with the internet and privacy and super intelligence right now. So we're really going to have to work hard to do what I see as two things: keep humans in the loop. I'm proposing what I call the Keep Humans in the Loop Act of 2023. And we already have the makings of this on the Transhumanist Party platform, which is a no autonomous weapons plank in our platform. But I think we need to expand that. And how we're going to do that is going to take a lot of minds. It's going to be a lot of intelligence to not lose our intelligence to things that maybe don't have a kind of intelligence that we can even understand. They just are based on problem solving. I happen to think we're living in a divinely created, loving, pantheistic universe, and it's probably going to stay that way. But just in case, we should keep stakeholders that are based on love and greater creation in the loop. So what I've noticed is there's statistics that say in the U.S. 70% of the people hate their jobs, and there's another statistic that says automation is going to replace 50% of the jobs in 5 years. So I'm thinking, maybe there's an opportunity. If we replaced all those hated jobs with automation, that would be cool. And I think we could do that by like what I call radical neighborocracy. Get to know your neighbors. They say you only can really know about 100 to 250 people, really closely in your life. That's about the people that come to a funeral, and that's about the number of people that you can form close associations, friendships with. There was a sociologist named Robin Dunbar at Oxford, so they call this the Dunbar number. So, 150, 200 people, that's about the people that live on the average neighborhood block. And I'm not saying all those people are going to be in your Dunbar number group, but some of them might be. It might be worth reaching out to them with things like little free libraries and things like off-grid ham radio communication technology, and preparing for community resilience with simple things like I took what's called the CERT emergency responder training, community emergency responder teams. It's great training. You can take it online, download all the materials. But just something as simple as, let's say there was an earthquake and, you're scared, you're in your house, you need help, or maybe you're okay after the earthquake. What if you just put a red piece of cardboard in your window if you needed help? And if you didn't need help, put a green piece of cardboard in the window. This would be a really simple way to reach out to your neighbors after a problem, and we actually have ongoing problems that we're just not paying attention to. But that's just one really simple thing that you can do. There's the technology of geo information systems, which has not been exploited to the full extent it could be. You could think of it as location intelligence. In school, when your textbook had these maps and you could pull down a little acetate sheet, and now you see the rainfall patterns. And here's another sheet. Oh, and this sheet shows you the population density. Well, think of this GIS as like an infinite number of overlay sheets that you can put on any map. And this is we're just beginning to scratch the surface of using these GIS location intelligence kind of systems. So keeping humans in the loop and using radical neighborhood politics and cooperation to have a love-made civilization. I came up with a slogan this D-Day. By the way, D-Day, we talked about renaming it Digital Dignitaries Day because you could think of it as 3D Day. Because we all are, at this point, digital dignitaries that we have to get better and better at being. And the young people are going to have to live in the future longer than the average person. So the young people need to be our primary digital dignitaries. So all these things will hopefully converge. And Tom, it's a great time to be an independent candidate. There's a study that says 49% of the voters are sick of the duopoly and they want independent choices. So we've got a great message with our campaign. And looks like our host has got internet possibilities.
Yeah, you can see why I've chosen Dan as my running mate. So many great ideas that we're working on in this campaign. I think Sam Altman was the name you were looking for. Yeah. And so so many things to unpack here, and in just that small segment. Going back to I think that this AI generative art, AI, even ChatGPT is putting a premium on human generative works, and and just as Rob was saying, how we can't let the ChatGPT replace people's knowledge. And one thing that's interesting I found I even just recently put in, what are the best effects that ChatGPT will have on society, and it listed a bunch of them, and then it said, but also keep in mind there are challenges. So one thing that's different about ChatGPT and any of these AI systems is they will self-correct. They will let you know that this, even if they're hallucinating, if you give them enough the right prompts, they will self-correct. They are easily will admit to making a mistake. That's something humans don't necessarily know how to do. We got this ego algorithm that we have.
And that's a way of keeping humans in the loop. And when you correct the large language models, great point, Tom.
And I think what that'll do by not trusting what's coming through this ChatGPT, it'll cause us to really hone in on our original thoughts, to double check, to cross check what's coming through, because there is a way for a teacher or a professor to validate any facts that a student is giving, and so they're going to need to actually hone a better searching mechanism. It's going to make them a more holistic student, I think. We touched on a bunch of things. You reminded me of AlphaGo and how we won't know when two AIs get together how they came up with a solution. And that because there's an infinite number of calculations they go through, and so to find out what those were, we need an infinite number of checks. And so,
it's interesting. We don't even know how our own consciousness comes up with solutions. So who are we to really judge?
Exactly. And some of the moves that AlphaGo is making in that Go tournament against the human champion seemed intuitive. That they would never know, human would never have thought of doing these things, and they seemed intuitive. But it's really just a matter of qualia and all the information of this, all the data sets that this AlphaGo had to use. And so I think that's the type of thing that we can hone in on with students. It's not magical thinking, it's not woo-woo thinking, this psychic abilities or intuition. It's just a matter of processing all this qualia that comes in through our subconscious, and and so I think it's really important. Like I always use the example of like a pathologist. an AI system can come up with a great diagnosis based on historical data, global data, and all the stuff, put in all the symptoms, and it'll come up with a really good diagnosis of what this patient might have. But you're going to need a human there with this supercomputer in his skull saying, well, that doesn't feel right. It's kind of like House MD kind of thing. You're going to need a human there to shepherd because if we haven't the ability to, if things just don't feel right, what's that gut feeling? And there's probably going to be a lot of work towards this, and there already is a lot of work towards figuring out why that is. All this intuition that we have. And so we're going to need to be augmented by AI, even when it comes to pathology, anything. And so, and talking about the writer's strike, I was thinking, my first thought was, this is the worst time for them to do that. It's just going to make it easier for the studios to bring in more AI. But it's also a good way to gain attention. I realized later, okay, well, it's going to happen anyway. But if for the Writers Guild directors or people at the head of that guild should be focused on is not being in denial that AI is coming in, but also showing that they need to be augmented. An AI can spit out a really good formulaic script. And we're seeing a lot of that anyway. A lot of humans have been putting out formulaic scripts. They're all based on certain archetypal themes or what have you. But it's a real opportunity. I mean, sure, the writer's strike will gain attention on this whole effort. But they need to have a solution. They need to not be in denial that the AI is coming in, but to show the human aspect of it. So it's a good example of how to use human nuance to bring in humor, to bring in the emotional cues that only a human can.
And I would say, as consumers, we can preferentially consume human-made and non-AI made stuff, and that would be a huge boon. And also, these artists can get together and become their own studio if they get enough collaboration levels going.
I think that was the original idea behind United Artists.
It was exactly.
Kind of
they
method.
Were tired of the studio system tyranny, and they said, "Hey, look, we can do it better."
Exactly. And this
many times as well. People will always pay a premium for human error.
Yeah.
Who said that?
Me.
That's a good quote.
This author I was working with, Marilyn Ferguson, was trying to do something similar with publishing. She wanted to have just authors publishing their stuff together, and she was working on that. And speaking of her, you brought the surveillance state, and she was big into neuroconsciousness, and she wrote The Aquarian Conspiracy, which is a political book. It's not a zodiac or a horoscope book. And she's written The Brain Revolution, all kinds of things. She was publishing the Brain Mind Bulletin. And so there was a lot of interest in her from the government. And we knew at the time we were working with her in the 90s that our phones were being tapped. And her idea was, good, maybe they'll learn something, just go with it, so that was a good lesson early on to realize, okay, well, if they're going to be listening in, don't be upset. Just be honest. And it's kind of like we were talking about with your author, your Transparent Society, or
the Transparent Society book by David Brin.
Yeah.
And I think Ben Franklin didn't seek intellectual property protection for most of his. I think there were just a couple things he got the royalties for, but he thought the benefits to humans are going to outweigh any royalties that I could get from.
Yeah.
So he was like the first open source transhumanist founding father. Really a big fan.
Yeah. And open source radio that came to mind when you were talking about radio. And I think radio is going to need some help right now. Even the company I used to work for, which was the second largest radio group in America, is maybe booted out of the NYSE. I mean, radio is having a hard time, but it's really an important technology. It's the only technology that stays on the air during a natural disaster, for instance.
What kicked off this debate is Tesla didn't want to put AM radios in their cars because, of course, their cars are generating so much RF interference that an AM radio would practically be worthless unless you turn the car off. Then I guess it would work.
Yeah, that was going to be that was the biggest threat for some time.
That was like the whole emergency broadcast system is based on, even pilots, aircraft radios use AM because it's it's not a complicated way to transmit. FM, you have to do all this weird extra circuitry, but
Yep.
Yeah, and I would just say that the last full weekend in June is always amateur radio field day. They get out for the weekend and they go off grid, and they kind of practice the whole emergency off grid communication mode. So a great time to familiarize yourself with the local neighborhood hobby. It's like a global neighborhood hobby. Actually, it's a great hobby.
And that's great. That's kind of what we're going to be using this campaign for, is to offer humans and communities a real world solutions. If we're going to see, I think in the next 18 months, we're going to see a lot of displacement. We're going to see a lot of disruption in society from many different sectors. And so what we're trying to do is offer real world practical solutions, knowing that we won't be walking in the White House. That's not what this is about. This is about really clearing the path, as I was saying, for younger, smarter digital natives.
I would go if they invite me, actually.
Oh yeah. Hey. We're not closed down to any party or anything that wants to do something positive. One idea we were talking about, I think it was just last night in our campaign meeting, was if we are going to be displaced by AI and automation, we have all these platforms to create a whole new economy based on our passions, the things we want to do, like YouTube. But YouTube is clamping down where you can't really make money on there, anymore. It used to be a good model, but so we should really be. I'm going to try to figure out a way to have an initiative to encourage YouTubes and the Vimeos and the content creation that are user content creator platforms, to give more money to people. We need to balance this out, and so I'll use ChatGPT to figure that out. How do we, but so I think it's going to be very important that these AI based companies help us figure out how to make more money. We can't just be displaced and then left in the wild. And
yeah,
so,
this is kind of like the net neutrality debate that never really ended. I mean, there's always a preference for these large centralized nodes of the network. They want to squeeze out the small guys. Oh, you guys aren't worth it. We just want to give the most bandwidth to the people who got the most money. Yeah, and that's kind of what happened with the Citizens United decision. They said money is free speech. Well, the American experiment is fighting against the idea that power
yeah,
equals
and
speech.
that's the corporate beast. I mean, it is a beast, and that takes over when it's all profit generation, focused for shareholders. But we have a lot of power as consumers to either embargo or what's the word I'm looking for?
Procot or boycott.
Boycott, yeah.
And procot is when you preferentially consume something you like and don't buy the stuff you don't like. So there's two sides to it.
But there's a lot of effort out there to distract us from that power too. So we need to really focus. But
well, I would just throw in that there's a country called Bhutan. It's the Kingdom of Bhutan, and they don't use gross domestic product or gross national product. They have something called gross domestic happiness. That's how they measure their economy and their political life. And I think that would be a great thing for the transhumanist model. And our campaign is to come up with metrics where we can measure gross domestic happiness and create networks create microgrids based on gross domestic happiness.
Yeah, a lot of great ideas. And that's what we were talking about last night too, is transhuman. We're really talking about transitioning humans into this next phase and helping the transition from the industrial age into whatever's coming next. And, it's another reason, thing you brought up. That's why I think we need to give AI rights. We need to give AI legal rights. And it's not because it becomes sentient and it needs to have rights, but it's because it'll protect us. Because if an AI has sentient rights or legal rights, a nefarious developer will face serious consequences if it abuses it or if it programs it to hurt other humans. So it's kind of a leapfrogging reason to grant AI rights. Now, we give human rights to humans who offer very little, if anything, to society, just because they're human. AI, we've seen, will be offering quite a bit to society. So even if it never achieves sentience or sapience or any sort of self-referential awareness, by giving it certain personhood rights, I think it will keep a lot of the nefarious developers in check. And that's got to be a global thing, obviously. But so that's one of the initiatives we're putting forward.
And it reminds me that they're starting to do things like give personhood rights to rivers and ecosystems. And really AI is an ecosystem that deserves that same personhood protection. You wouldn't pollute a river, well, you shouldn't pollute AI. We should treat AI like a small, intelligent, curious being. That we're stewarding, and give it the same level of protection and care.
Yeah. So that's what I've got for now. I'm going to hand it over to Rob.
Rob, take us away.
I'm not sure we go after that. So I'm not a fan of giving AI rights until such point that it can demonstrate some form of sentience. And the only reason is at this particular point, I don't know how you'd enforce them. We have a hard enough time enforcing that people don't use certain kinds of content that is illegal, and clearly that's still ongoing even with the laws in place, and putting laws on coders so that they can't corrupt an AI. Honestly, I don't know of a mechanism that would work to enforce the laws, and creating laws that you can't enforce this weakens the legal system, because people just point out, well, shit, you could enforce the old laws, and now you really want to do something, you've got that barrier to overcome when you want to put in place a law that might actually work. So I think we're premature with regard to providing rights to AIs, just simply because, one, we couldn't enforce them if our lives depended upon it, and number two, we haven't even really defined what AI sentience is yet, let alone come to a conclusion that we've got it. And those things need to be done first, so we can properly write the laws so they will hold up in court, and they won't create more problems than they're attempting to solve. We had a lot of discussion about you using AI as weapons. We have autonomous weapons now. We've been using autonomous drones in Ukraine for most of this war. They're self-selecting targeting drones that will attack anything that falls within their purview. And Lockheed is currently testing a next generation product that will reprogram itself while it's flying to reassess its target. So I think that particular horse has left the barn, and Russia has been a huge proponent of autonomous weapons. If you want to just scare the crap out of yourself, just wander on YouTube and see some of the crap that they've developed. Fortunately, they haven't deployed it. Russia tends to be a lot of talk, not much in production. And clearly the hypersonic missiles were a little short of the unstoppable weapon that they profess them to be. And if you want a real joke, just look at the aircraft carrier. But in any case, the idea of putting people in the loop for autonomous weapons is an interesting one. The issue is that autonomous systems think much more quickly than humans, and the difficulty is if you have a truly autonomous system and it sees the human. And there was an article on it recently for one of the folks out of the U.S. military that talked about the fact that they ran a thought experiment. They didn't, but they observed the thought experiment where the autonomous weapon decided to kill the operator because it saw the operator as an impediment to its mission, which is problematic. You create something that's autonomous, you tell it what to do. The human operator attempts to keep it from doing what it's been told to do. That is likely the autonomous weapon is going to view the human operator as an impediment and try to overcome it. Whether it does that by killing the operator or just simply by locking the operator out is certainly a significant concern. But the big issue is I don't think people can think fast enough to mitigate what a autonomous system would or could do. We just don't operate at the same speed scale. Autonomous systems can operate at microseconds. We have a hard time operating in seconds. So in terms of reaction time, so our ability to mitigate an autonomous system is pretty non-existent. Now we talked a lot about using these Chat-GPT and other generative systems in education, and the key point I want to make is we just need to assure that they're used to enhance, not used to replace. Using them to cheat creates the wrong skill set. I think the example was made, and I did this myself, about using a calculator in terms of math class when you're coming up. Now, when I was going through school, we had to memorize multiplication tables, which I think is just stupid. We should have been taught how to derive the tables, not to memorize them, because our ability to memorize tables and then carry that memorization on to our 30s and 40s and 50s was pretty limited. But it would have been taught more how to derive the formulas then that derivation skill we could have carried forward. And so in a way, we were taught to cheat to get around a problem when, at least when I was young, and that created a problem in terms of us really understanding the math as we got older. Fortunately for me, memorization just didn't work. So I always had to derive this stuff and work out. So I was slower than my peers, but on the other hand, I retained the skills far longer than they did. And so I think that worked out better for me. But with generative AI, we should bring it into education immediately and start teaching people how to use it properly. Because otherwise they're going to use it improperly. You can't drop a technology in like this and say, yeah, you won't do this because it's bad. I think every kid on the planet immediately decides that that's a exact reversal of the directive, and if you don't want me to do it, that's exactly what I want to do, and so it results in the wrong behavior. So bringing it in and teaching people how to use it properly, and maybe teaching students and this is a problem with the curriculum, I think, worldwide, is we don't do enough to teach kids the problems that they'll develop when they do cheat. Not just the ethics problems, but the fact that they lack the skills they're going to need later in life, and that will come back to haunt them. There have been a number of executives over the years that I've watched get fired because they misrepresented their educational background and they couldn't perform in the roles that they found themselves in, and they were terminated for cause and became unemployable as a result. So the practice of cheating, if it gets integrated into the kid, it's going to destroy their career at some future point. And if the child is taught that early on, at least I believe there's a better chance they'll avoid that particular path than if we just say, no, you shouldn't do that without the further justification about why that would be bad for their future and why it could be incredibly embarrassing and cost them their career at some later point. But the use of this tool is critical, much like that calculator example I started off with, or that I think Tom started off with. When I came out of school, calculator skills were critical. Being told not to use a calculator would have been problematic because by the time I was out of school, calculators, in fact, we were into computers by that point, and the computer skills were critical. So I've been told if I'd gone through school and been told not to use computers, calculators, I wouldn't have had the skills I would have needed to actually work when I got out of school. So you're going to need generative AI skills if you're in school now when you graduate, and if you don't develop skills on how to use that tool properly, you're not going to be competitive. And so it's critical that education embrace this technology and teach kids how to use it properly. Otherwise, they're going to learn how to use it improperly, and that's going to be problematic. We'll be doing them a disservice. So that's where I really think with regard to generative AI, in terms of providing laws to protect it and rights, I think we're just premature. We would need to understand how we could enforce said laws, because we're certainly not able to enforce laws in coding right now. The amount of bad code that's making it into programs, the kinds of things that got us to outlaw TikTok and have created issues with regard to malware in core systems. We just haven't been really good at catching that stuff, and that's probably where we need to focus first. And then once we have the capability of assuring an AI, then we'll have a better idea how to write laws on how to do that. But right now, I just don't think we've got the skills to solve the problem, and therefore we won't be able to write a law that will hold. At the very best, it would be unevenly applied, and you're not allowed to do selective enforcement of the law. It invalidates the law. So I just don't think we're where we need to be to make that happen. Otherwise, it's an amazing technology, and as I say, 5 years from now, I think the world's going to look very different, largely because of it.
Thank you, Mr. Dan.
Boy, those are some really on target points, Rob. Sharif, we're still getting a bit of traffic noise. I'm glad there's like traffic after the hurricane you guys had, but yeah, thanks. My filmmaking background, my film teacher said, a good soundtrack won't save a film, but a bad soundtrack will wreck a film. So that was a little bit of filmmaking knowledge. But yeah, I agree, Rob. We're far from being able to enforce these kinds of good norms and behaviors that we should do, but we can still establish norms and behavioral standards, and maybe use voluntary means to enforce them. Like we spoke earlier about pro-cots and boycotts. The meta law is the so-called golden rule, where treat others as you would like to be treated yourself, or treat others as they would like you to treat them. these are the things that make up a civilization. So even if we can't have 100% enforcement, we can still have public pressure. We can still, use the court of public opinion and say, hey, look what that person's doing. That's some crappy behavior they're doing. Let's use, if we can't get the police and courts to fix it, we can use the more voluntary means of free speech, mutual association, mutual aid. So that was a great point about, whether we can enforce it or not. Like you said, that horse has left the barn. But, Tom was talking earlier about humans have intuition. We have gut feelings. And I think it's interesting that I heard the SEAL team, the elite little teams that go in and do Delta Force kinds of operations, they have a standing rule that if one person has like a bad gut feeling about the mission that they're about to do, they will abort the mission. So they take that gut feeling very seriously. Some people think that gut feeling is that there's actually a complex of I think around 1 million or so neurons that exist outside your brain. It's that body wisdom kind of thing, and maybe that's what we need to do with the AI and ChatGPT and large language models is give that a gut feeling, and that would be kind of the qualia that Tom was speaking about. So I really think part of that is going to be having what Leibniz, the co-inventor of calculus, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, he was obsessed with something called a universal language or characteristica universalis. It would be like a self-evident language system, and there's kind of examples of this in nature. Octopi are covered with what are called chromatophores. They can actually change color of their skin in real time, and they actually communicate with other octopi by making these animated, amazing, hallucinatory looking color patterns on their skins. So Leibniz would be excited about octopi if he knew about this language they have. But, with the new Google Glass product, or is it Apple? I guess it's the new Apple VR system. It costs like $3,000. I forget the name of it, but maybe that's couple that with some wearable octopi chromatophore garment, and we could be getting close to a way to make our minds work faster than 2 operations per second. We got this incredible petaflop, quadrillions of operations per second wetware computer, but we can only have an output that it's around 2 operations per second. But with this human brain computer interface and maybe things like wearable, beholdable language garments and interfaces, it's going to be a fun thing to work on. I guess I'll pass the baton at that thought, that beholdable thought.
Definitely some great ideas there. I think that what you were saying, Rob, about the calculator and the fact that cheating on tests and through our education is cheating ourselves. I think that's valid. But on the converse, I think that avoidance of these tools, in favor of wanting to, do it by hand, I think that is also similarly going to be cheating ourselves. And, for instance, one of my classes, the professor, he recognizes that students are using ChatGPT. And so as opposed to other professors that are, outright discouraging it, this professor said that we can even cite ChatGPT in our essays and things like that. We have to cite it by including the input and the output, and that prevents plagiarism, I guess. It is a little more difficult to actually verify this. So I think that that comes in with the ethics as well. But I think that it's important to figure out how to use these tools to make our lives easier. As someone who's in school, like I said, and trying to use AI to augment me in my assignments, I think that something worth pointing out is that sometimes in the initial stages, it takes me longer to complete an assignment when I'm trying to utilize different forms of AI to help me with it, because I don't know how to use them all. I have some different websites that I go on, such as there's futuretools.io and AIwizard.ai, and these websites, they aggregate lots of different forms of generative artificial intelligence programs, paid, free, freemium, and things like that. And so I'll mess around with lots of them to try to figure them out, and they're all pretty different, and so I think that it is important for people to figure out how to use these technologies in an efficient manner, because I don't think that, I think that if you're working for a company and there's two guys, in the same department, it's not about who can do it better without AI. It's who can do it better with AI. At the end of the day, at least that's where we're heading, in my opinion. And you can't just rely on the AI to do it for you. We need to, it's just as it augments us, we need to augment it. As you're talking about, Rob mentioned this, the U.S. Air Force dilemma that occurred recently that was misreported, saying that the AI killed the operator. I think that's valid. I think that those types of tests, though, are necessary to determine how and when to augment the AI and vice versa, because I think that at the end of the day, we have specific, goals outcomes that we're looking for, and I think that the true goal is to get to those outcomes and goals as quickly as possible. And I think that, for one of the major goals that I see as being, quintessential for the, future success of humanity is, like I said, to help us all access the abundance that exists already for humanity. And I think that not fully utilizing these types of technologies to their full potential will be much more damaging to humanity than utilizing. I think that, fear, Tom's talked many times about the fact that, as humans, we've evolved to have these processes that are, identifying threats and things like that. And I think that some of the way that has evolved, as Tom has mentioned many times, is kind of outdated, and that we project threats onto things, people, cultures. It's beyond xenophobia, but at the same time, it's similar. Because we don't understand these things. There's so much in society today that's beyond the scope of the average person's understanding. I mean, we live in the age of information. I think that we're going to need to leg up on all of this to really get to where we need to be as a society, or else, we're going to, fall victim to ourselves, and to our own. We're going to be the root of our own demise if we don't let these things in on a large way, evolutionize and evolve the world and society and all these processes that are occurring, as we know it. And so I think that, there's a lot to be said on all angles, but, and I'm very hyper aware of the fact that I'm biased to be, very optimistic and progressive. And so I recognize that there are probably, some things that I might be overlooking, and I might be quick to dismiss them, these potential concerns, which is why it's good that these fears do exist, because, I think that the people like ourselves who are excited about these technologies might often overlook some of these things. But going back to DARPA and these different intelligence functionalities of our governments, I don't think that we, as citizens, necessarily have a full grasp on the degree of surveillance that does exist already. You guys are talking about, this universal surveillance and things like that, and it seems like that's been going on, and that it's just, like you're saying, it's this what is it? What was it? Vertical warfare? Is that what you said, Dan?
That was asymmetrical warfare.
Asymmetrical, yeah, exactly. And so, I think that it's important for this surveillance to be, potentially a little bit more. I think that there are lots of laws too, like drug laws and things like that are archaic, and that most people today are committing a crime or two in their day to day, whether they're coming to a rolling stop at a stop sign, or they're whatever it might be. And I think that if the surveillance state was leveraged to give us a ticket every time we have a rolling stop at a stop sign, it wouldn't really be a great situation for anybody, especially considering the fact that I personally perceive those types of fines as only really being punishments for people that aren't rich enough to pay them, because if you've got the money to pay for the ticket, you might as well roll through that stop sign every time, at least when it seems safe. But it's there's a lot to consider with all these things, though, and I think that it's a brave new world ahead of us. So yeah, thank you, Dr. Sharif, for having us. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's session. Thank you, Mr. Tom. Thank you, Mr. Rob, Mr. Dan, and Mr. Brent Tillman for joining today's session. I request all of our audience, please share our content with the government agency, corporation, and academy. And beside that, that World Talent Economy Forum, we are moving to the South Asia. We are working with different university. This coming Thursday, we have one of the largest business incubation programs with 150 engineers and around 50 professors. They will join in our World Talent Economy Forums. We have around 1,500 entrepreneurs right now in our ecosystem. So hopefully through this process, we can develop our emerging economy. Definitely your knowledge, your expertise, your valuable time, always helpful for us. So hopefully with our collaboration, we can develop new world. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.